Thank you so much. I really wish I could be with you in Berlin. It would have been legal to travel now, but not without quarantine going back. So I'm glad the technology allows us to meet in this way. It's nice to see some colleagues and friends and some new faces, even though it's over a computer. But hopefully, here's to hoping that soon enough we can all meet in person again. I'm very pleased to chair this session because it's, of course, a hugely important topic, what to do about the fiscal rules in the Eurozone. And Sebastian's introduction was perfect, I think, because it points out really what is at stake and how big the numbers are in terms of the economic effects potentially of different fiscal policies, and therefore what sort of policies the rules encourage or require. The rules at the moment are suspended, as we know, because of the pandemic, and they will be suspended into next year. But that makes it politically all the more important to try to get to some understanding or ideally consensus of what rules we go back to or go into when we go back, because it would seem strange to go back to rules that were already recognized as not working very well. So this is what I want to just say by way of introduction, that changes were already underway, or at least the need for change was widely recognized even before the pandemic. The pandemic changes everything. It seems to me that everything is being rethought at the moment, including fiscal policy. But we know that there was already a sort of ambivalent desire to change the rules. Everyone agrees that the rules weren't fit for purpose anymore, or at least not working. Nobody agrees on what they should be instead. There are proposals on the table. The European Fiscal Board has gone towards at least establishing some principles. They recommend that fiscal rules should follow. But it's all to play for, and that's why the idea is being presented now, as we heard in the previous panel too, that's sort of what Thomas said to round off the previous panel. The kind of ideas that are actually being put on the table now will help the decision makers to try to get to some sort of consensus. Probably towards the end of this year, this will have to be addressed in the Eurogroup and eventually among the leaders, heads of state and government. So I'm very, very pleased that this session we will have Philippe Martin and Xavier Ragot present their recent paper. I understand Jean Pisani-Ferry is also in the virtual audience. He is a co-author. I don't know who of the two will present, or if they'll present jointly, but I have seen Philippe on the call already. Philippe Martin is the chair of the French Council of Economic Advisors. Xavier Ragot is president of the French Economic Observatory. It's obviously a high-powered proposal. I look forward to hearing them present it, but I think it's particularly important because we know that the French government has its ambition to try to nail this during its presidency in the first half of next year. Although we don't know yet what the French policy on what the changes should be is. I don't know if there is a formulated policy yet, and I can only imagine that what we're about to hear will at the very least inform the political decision about what to pursue. So it's doubly important, intellectually in itself and politically, because it will matter in France and in the Eurozone. Just before I hand over to whether it's Philippe or Xavier, I'll have to be told, but we have a stellar panel to discuss. We have Guntram Wolff, who everyone knows, the director of Bruegel in Brussels. We have Annamaria Simonazzi, professor of economics at Sapienza. And we have Thomas Westphal from the Federal Ministry of Finance, head of the Europe section there. We were meant to have Margit Schratzenstaller, who I think has not been able to join us, but do correct me if I'm wrong about that. We will miss her, but if that changes, let me know. I will ask Philippe and or Xavier to present their paper, and I will then ask each of the panelists to respond with their initial reactions, thoughts, comments in the order that they appear in the program, and then try to have a bit of an interactive discussion and ideally take as many questions as we can from those who are watching. So feel free to put questions into the chat. while you're here, I will sort of monitor them, and we will see. I'll give people a choice whether they want to ask their question themselves, or depending on time, I may group some questions together and ask them. But for now, let me hand over to Philippe, Xavier, who is there and who will want to actually do the presentation.
Hi, Martin. I will do the
Hi, Philippe.
presentation. Thanks.
Very good. Philippe, over to you.
Thanks for the introduction and the invitation. And indeed, Jean and Xavier are part of the audience, so they will respond to the question. So you may have seen that actually this morning, VOXEU published a summary of our proposal, and it's part of the VOXEU debate on euro area reform. And indeed, as you said, and the introduction and the past presentation was excellent, because indeed, this is, I think, the right time to have an intellectual but policy-oriented debate on what we need to do on these fiscal reforms. And as I am not shy on publicity, let me also put the English version of in the chat of the proposals, the longer version that we've published. Also, it's in French and in English. The one I just sent is the English one. So what we've tried to do with Jean and Xavier is indeed going back to in some sense what the fiscal rules should do, the basics of what fiscal rules should do, but also taking seriously the institutional framework that needs to be consistent with these proposals. Indeed, as you said, Martin, there are many proposals, and in some sense, I would not say that there's a consensus, but clearly, and you'll see, we put a lot of focus on the issue of debt sustainability, and this has been indeed part of the proposals of the EFB. This has been also part of the proposal of, for example, of Blanchard, Leandro, and Zettelmeier to really put the focus on the issue of debt sustainability. Where we part from Blanchard et al. Is that, as you know, they focus on standards, which in some sense we think are a bit too far from the existing framework. So we tend to think that we're trying to be a bit more realistic, maybe in terms of the proposed institutional framework. So in the presentation, I'm going to focus on the fiscal rules. There are also things that we make some proposals also on the demand spillovers, but I'm not going to have time to talk about this. So let me share with you my slides. Can you see them? Yeah?
We can see them.
Good. Okay. So indeed, the two objectives that we put at the core of our proposals is the debt sustainability. And that's the reason is that indeed, this is the negative externality that is at the core of what's happening when one country has a public debt that is too large, because it generates some risks for the stability, both on the financial and monetary dimension, on the whole of the union, when there's a risk on insolvency. And as we know, and we've seen during the crisis, this is also very much correlated to the risk of a potential exit of a member state in terms of, and this generates a lot of negative spillovers in terms of contagion, et cetera, et cetera. The second objective, but which I won't talk in the main presentation, but we can come back to it in the discussion, is the demand externality and the fact that indeed we know that fiscal policies in one country can have spillovers effects on other trade partners. But clearly the focus here on what I'm going to talk about is the debt sustainability. So indeed, and from that point of view, the presentation by Sebastian just before was very, make my life quite easy, because indeed what we're proposing is a debt sustainability, which we propose a debt target, which is a country-specific 5-year debt target. And the country-specific dimension is important, but because as Sebastian was showing, indeed, there's quite a lot of heterogeneity. And if we were to apply the rules as they are, indeed, this would have quite a lot of negative impact. So the country-specific debt sustainability is going to depend, and that's where we're going to put the economic analysis on the fact that there may be sustainable primary surpluses that are quite different in different countries. Italy, for example, has shown that it is able to have sustainable primary surpluses for quite long periods. This has not been the case, for example, in France, from that point of view. And then, as we know, debt sustainability, of course, depends a lot on the R minus G difference. And again, nominal interest rates, growth rates, and inflation vary with each country. So that's, from that point of view, that's the reason we go for this medium-term, 5-year, country-specific debt target, and which is specific for each country. And so the way we think of it is that each government submits a debt target, again 5-year, which is then assessed at the national level by independent fiscal institutions. And if we have time, we'll discuss this, because this is an important institutional dimension of our recommendation, and then by the EU. And the different vulnerabilities in terms of maximum primary balance and also in terms of the risk on R and G generate a debt target in a reduction in debt to GDP ratio that the government commits, each government commits for this 5-year period. And so here, this has to be assessed in terms of debt sustainability, long-term debt sustainability for each country. Once you have the debt target, and I will tell you what is the institutional framework that generates an agreement on this debt target. In some sense, it's a bit of reverse engineering. You will have an instrument, which is the nominal expenditure ceiling, which comes from the analysis or the prediction on potential growth, and on what is the net discretionary measures on revenue. So once you have the debt target, 5-year debt target, you can generate what should be the growth rate, the maximum growth rate on nominal expenditure ceiling, once you analyze what are tax measures, which are permanent tax measures that could increase or decrease this ceiling. And that's basically what is going to generate an upper bound for your annual budget laws. Now that means that clearly, subject to the compliance of this requirement, that leaves automatic stabilizers to operate fully. In this note, we didn't go into the technical detail on why this rule is stabilizing. We did that in a earlier note, and we know that there's been quite a lot of work showing indeed that not having a fiscal rule which is based on structural deficit has actually better properties in terms of stabilization. One point, and in fact this was an issue that was already a bit discussed, is that in our proposals, we don't have a golden rule. So we don't have a specific debt which is for investment, because even for green investment, because basically we think that at the end we have to take into account any type of spending. It's difficult, as we know, to differentiate what is investment and what is not. So I think this we think that would not be a very good idea. However, and that will be the role in particular of the independent financial institution, it will be important to stress the risk that indeed when you spend more on current spending and not enough on investment, this can have an impact on potential growth, and potential growth will have also an impact on debt sustainability. So that's the way we actually differentiate between spending that has or does not have an impact on potential growth. On climate, we take into account the time profile of climate investments, or actually not we, but the institutions, the independent fiscal institutions have to take into account this time profile, so as to prevent the fact that you had perpetual delay of the green investments, So in some sense, we have to take that into account also in terms of sustainability. We have a recommendation also on the debt ceiling in practice. To ensure that we have consistency on between the multi-year, the 5-year public finance programming and the annual budget laws. Here we copy and paste something that comes from Germany. So we have an adjustment account with a deficit ceiling that would be credited when spending is lower than the expenditure ceiling and debited when it exceeds it. So in terms of the institutional framework, we put a lot of focus on national, on domestic institutions. This is a theme that has been quite often repeated, that we need to, in some sense, renationalize a big part of the fiscal debates. So that means stopping the micromanaging of national fiscal choices, which we think does not work and has a lot of generate a lot of toxicity in the political debates. But that means clearly, and we go into detail on that in the note, increased resources, better surveillance capabilities, and more guarantees on the independence on the independent fiscal institutions at the national level. And so that means here that also we also give a stronger role for the EU in protecting the union stability. Again, on the issue of debt sustainability, on excessive indebtedness, we talk also about non-cooperative policies and demand externality component, but this is not something I'll have time to detail right now, but we can come back on that later. On the institutional framework, I'm not going to go into detail on this graph, but basically it starts from the government, and so this part here that gives the 5-year debt target. It's submitted to the national independent fiscal institutions, which has to assess and validate the debt target based on the risks that I talked about. Then the European Fiscal Board has also a larger and more important role in our framework. Because it's going to define the methodology on debt sustainability. It audits and makes sure that indeed these independent fiscal institutions have the good methods and the independence that is necessary to make their job. The Commission remains key, of course, in the assessment of debt sustainability of these rules, in particular in terms of recommending to the ECOFIN the 5-year fiscal stance, both for the area and also whether to approve or reject the member states' debt targets, and which goes with them the expenditure rules. And then at the end, it's the ECOFIN that determines not only the recommendation on the overall euro area fiscal stance, but whether it approves or rejects the debt targets and the expenditure ceiling. In terms of enforcement, so basically the Council remains the one that approves the debt target and the expenditure rule. There is an excessive deficit procedure that is triggered by a violation of the country-specific expenditure rule. If there is a risk of budget violating the expenditure rule, the Commission refers to it to the Eurogroup. We have the adjustment accounts that I talked about. And again, also, we think that it's important, the role of the independent fiscal institutions, but also of the Commission and the Council, when they pronounce themselves on the budget, the debt target, and on the expenditure rule. There will be a legal dimension, which I talked about, but also clearly there will be financial consequences in the sense of increasing the borrowing costs when indeed some of these institutions, especially the national fiscal institutions, will say, look, in this debt target is maybe not strong enough, is not ambitious enough, and this is putting at risk in some scenarios the debt sustainability of the country. This clearly may have some financial consequences. I should say also that in our framework, clearly, the ECB is in charge of potential self-fulfilling expectations, which could be triggered, obviously, by this type of pronouncement. So clearly, there's a separation of work. The ECB is in charge of self-fulfilling expectations-driven crises, but here we are talking about fundamental based debt sustainability. And finally, let me end with this. Martin, you alluded to the fact that indeed we are now in a situation where the rules have been deactivated, but we'll have to think about how to deactivate this special situation. So we will condition, we recommend to condition the deactivation of the general escape clause on first a political agreement. So that's the reason why we should start discussing these issues quite early on the new European fiscal framework, because indeed it would be very unwise to come back to the ancient rules, which I think there is now a consensus don't work very well. But also, so that's a political condition, but also on an economic condition, which is the effective return of the EU economy to a level of GDP per capita, which is basically the pre-crisis level of GDP per capita. Okay, so let me end here. I have other, we have other proposals, but I wanted to focus here and concentrate on the fiscal rules themselves and not the overall fiscal framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philippe. You need to unshare your screen. Thank you. Fantastic. I have plenty of questions, but I'm not going to abuse my position as chair, so I'll pass it to our panelists to give their reactions, comments, and I am confident we'll ask some probing questions so we can go back to you and your co-authors afterwards, Philippe, to get some further clarifications. Guntram from Bruegel, I'll start with you.
Well, thanks a lot for the invitation. And let me say that, of course, I share a lot of the concerns that were raised about the rules framework and some of the implications at the beginning. And I also do share the concerns that Sebastian Dulin pointed out about the delayed recovery of some of the Eurozone countries, in particular of Italy. And actually, I did make the point last week at the informal ECOFIN in Lisbon that, of course, there is scope for short-term additional fiscal stimulus to help us reduce the gap, the output gap in the short term. But I think that is actually a question that is quite apart from the fiscal rules question, because as we know, currently the fiscal rules are not in place. And I think there is widespread agreement, even in the ECOFIN, the conservative ECOFIN, that in the short term, it would be foolish to remove fiscal support too early or too rapidly, because that would indeed be detrimental to the Eurozone recovery. I also do share, and I have to say, the point, the skepticism about the Blanchard-Leandro Zettelmeier paper. I do think it has institutionally lots of problems. And by the way, I also think economically it is unthinkable to have an institution come out with a public pronouncement that there's a significant probability of default in a country, and therefore that country needs to adjust its fiscal path. I think that would be immediately triggering self-fulfilling fiscal crisis. So I think a completely unfeasible framework. Now, turning to your paper, Philippe and colleagues, so it's very nice to see you also again. I do want to sort of take issue with a few points, and perhaps also for the sake of debate, and sort of, in a sense, land in a very different place where you land. I mean, one important dimension which I think I want to raise at the beginning is the question of rules versus discretion. I mean, when I read these papers, I always have the impression the authors think that there is really no discretion and everybody plays exactly by the rules and the rules are applied to 100%. Well, that hasn't been the reality of the Eurozone for many, many years. I mean, at least since the arrival of the Juncker Commission, there was lots of discretion in the application of the fiscal rules. And I'm wondering why that is not reflected in these papers. Now, one can debate whether that discretion is appropriate or not, but there definitely has been lots of discretion, both at the side of the Commission as well as at the side of the Council. And arguably, since the Juncker Commission, fiscal policy making in the Eurozone has become much less tight and much less focused on rapid deficit reduction than it was before. So in a sense, I think policymakers have changed quite a bit their behavior and have adapted their fiscal reaction function quite substantially. So that's my first point. My second point is on the question of centralization versus decentralization. You put a strong emphasis on the decentralization and having national independent fiscal institutions take decisions and sort of monitor the fiscal rules. And I frankly speaking, I have doubts. I mean, I have doubts for two reasons. I mean, the one reason is, of course, that I don't want to offend here Pierre Moscovici and the French Fiscal Council. So let's talk about the German Fiscal Council. I just can't believe that the German Fiscal Council would be either explicitly or implicitly wouldn't be implicitly or explicitly captured by the domestic political system. So to think that an independent national fiscal council can do a good job in sort of neutrally evaluating what's going on, it seems to me that that is an illusion. So that's one criticism of the decentralization. And I have to say the other criticism of the decentralization is, to my mind, that it is also an illusion. I mean, we live in a monetary union, and in a monetary union, we are bound to be debating our fiscal policies among each others. And yes, that will be toxic. And yes, that will be difficult. But I would argue it's an unavoidable part of being in a monetary union. And to think you can get rid of it, I think is really fooling yourself, because we are bound by monetary policy. And that monetary policy brings our fiscal policies through bond purchases and many, many other channels very much together. So I don't think you can really detoxify the sort of controversial debates that happen between countries, because they are just the essence of being in a monetary union, and arguably they are a step towards going into, I would say, what I would call a fiscal union, meaning ultimately a joint sharing and joint discussion of our fiscal policies with increasing joint fiscal elements, which we are actually implementing. So I don't believe really in this decentralization argument to push the debate. Now, the third point is on the green investment. I mean, I really think it's a mistake to leave that out of the reform. I really think you have to discuss it in the reform, and it has to be a significant part of the reform package. Why is that? Well, basically because the current rules and also the interpretation of the current rules disincentivize public investments. It's politically economy-wise impossible to do an investment if you have to cut as a counterpart a social security expenditure or a pension expenditure, given if you want to maintain the same deficit. So inherently, the rules bias you against investments, and by biasing you against investments, you miss out on the important green investments. And if you think we want to decarbonize our economies, there will have to be investments at some stage in the next 10 years. So I think this needs to be, to my mind, one of the centerpieces of the reform. And I really was disappointed not to see it. And that's why I'm frankly saying it, because I do think this will be the generational issue that we are facing. And Martin, I don't know how much time I have, but I do want to give sort of one last observation, which is about Next Generation EU, which is the EU's recovery fund, which I thought could also somehow be reflected in this framework. And I think we have to work more on that also. I mean, the Next Generation EU is actually quite a big deal. It's quite a big deal for some countries, also money-wise. And what we learn, interestingly, is that in the period 22, 23, and 24, it contributes to national budgets of countries like Italy between 0.5 and 1% of GDP. And interestingly, in grants. And then in addition, there's loans. So for Italy, it's actually quite substantial. And interestingly, the grants will not count towards the fiscal rules and not count towards the national deficits. At least that's the way it looks like. I mean, I'm sure this is still controversially debated. Now, if you look at what that means in terms of the fiscal adjustments, it actually means fiscal adjustments are delayed. So even if you have a thought experiment that the old fiscal rules were to be strictly applied as of 22 or as of 23, the Next Generation EU would actually delay the fiscal adjustment in Italy and other countries by at least a year or two. Now, then you have a cliff edge after that, right? When Next Generation EU stops paying out the money. That cliff edge actually is really, really big and then important. But in the year 22 or 23, whenever the rules will apply and will supposedly strictly be applied, there is quite a big buffer for the net recipients of Next Generation EU. And somehow that has to be, I think, reflected or at least factored in the whole reform debate. So I think, Martin, I don't want to take too much time, but thank you.
You will have an opportunity to add further thoughts afterwards. But thank you very much. Thank you very much, Guntram. Annamaria, you're next. Annamaria, are you there?
With thanking for the opportunity to discuss this interesting paper, which puts forward a reform of the European fiscal framework. The premise is that fiscal rules are necessary, but are inadequate in the current situation. And the author suggests to replace uniform numerical criteria with an assessment of that sustainability. A second point, which I think is very important, is their argument that monetary unions entail two externalities. The first is the possibility of crisis of insolvency, and the other is the, let's call it, deflationary bias or the demand externalities. And they stress that only the former was taken into account in the Stability Pact. So I have a general comment and three specific points. The general comment is that this proposal is meant to correct or leave behind the rigidity of the Maastricht criteria, although they still remain within the general framework of rules. As Guntram observed, the problem is not to be within the rules or discretion. The problem is which theory inspires the rules. And although there have been changes in the rules, these, I think, have been occurring far behind the necessity and were imposed by the changing conditions. I mean, they were responding to the situation coming more and more dramatic. As far as the proposal itself, I think that it is surely a progress on the current rules, but the question is, will it be enough in order to tackle the reality, the problems that we are confronting? And here I will pick up 3 points. The first, which has been already stressed by Sebastian Dollien, his analysis of what are the trends in GDP growth if the current situation remains has to do with the fact that the COVID-19 crisis has not just increased public debts, but has further polarized their distribution. We have now 7 member states that have debts over 110% of GDP, and these countries will be constrained in pursuing growth. Consolidation, as far as the experience of Italy can tell, will not reverse the debt accumulation following the pandemic. It is true that we had several decades of primary surpluses, but we also had several decades of very, very low growth. The debt sustainability may depend to a large extent on the continuation of an extremely lax monetary policy. So the European Central Bank currently holds a large share of these debts, but it will need to unwind them when monetary policy consideration warranted. Whenever that process begins, it may cause turbulence in Eurozone financial markets, and that in turn would increase the cost of rolling over public debt, raising the specter of systemic instability in the banking sector. Thus, low interest payments, though likely to remain low for a while, may provide a misguiding reassurance. Long-term risks may actually have increased, and if unaddressed, any future reform of review of the EU fiscal rules aimed at making the pace of fiscal consolidation politically more feasible will buy time, but not solve the underlying problem of sustainability. Quite a few member states will remain vulnerable to future shocks. So I think that finding a way to manage the mountain of Eurozone debt, which has been accumulated during the pandemic, is necessary to stabilize growth expectations and create a favorable environment for private sector investment. The second point relates to the issue of debt sustainability itself. The authors correctly note that the main variables entering in the determination of fiscal sustainability, the share of interest payments in GDP, the rate of growth of income, and the share of the primary balance are not independent from one another. Moreover, the estimates are also highly uncertain. But there is a third point which is, according to me, even more serious. These variables may be out of the control of the government. In fact, it is not possible to assess the debt sustainability of a country in isolation, neglecting the spillover effects deriving from the interdependencies that bind the various countries to one another. While pointing out the existence of these externalities and specifically the demand externalities, the authors, however, neglect or underrate their role when estimating debt sustainability. For instance, as it has been already mentioned, if Germany is serious on its plan to return to compliance with the debt brake by 2023-24, this will have serious consequences across the European Union. If the rate of growth of GDP and the interest rate are to a greater or lesser extent beyond the control of a country, a heavy burden will be shifted upon the primary balance, with the severe consequences already experienced in the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, as well as during the whole history of the European Union. The authors are aware of this problem. In fact, they observe that, and I quote, "It is difficult to design a system of rules that simultaneously responds to the two potentially contradictory imperatives of ensuring sustainability and supporting demand. In the absence of an additional instrument, such as central budget, the only possibility is to define ex ante how to respond to trade-offs between them. A possible option is to focus on the insolvency imperative and to disregard the demand externality, as in Blanchard and other authors, 2021. Well, this is the same option that has been chosen in the Stability Pact, with effects, as the authors point out, that are likely to be counterproductive, an understatement according to me. So, and also to entrust the Commission with the responsibility for the management of the demand externalities, as the authors suggest, doesn't sound very reassuring. The German excessive surpluses have continued undisturbed over the years, despite the recommendation of the Commission. So, as for the third and last point, which relates to risk sharing, solidarity, as Robertson mentioned in a paper in 1953, is a scarce and very perishable good. Fiscal sustainability can only be achieved if countries are put in the condition of being self-sufficient. But vices and virtues are not all on one side. Creditor countries have gained significant benefits from the European Monetary Union, and debtor countries have also suffered costs, but all lose from the system imploding. In the past, this prospect succeeded in mobilizing counteractive forces strong enough to stall disintegration, but not to set the Union on a longer-term sustainability path. I think that the discussion on the Stability Pact is actually distracting the attention from the most challenging threats that are facing the European Union. The world economy is undergoing a structural change of proportion comparable to that experienced in the 70s. Forecasts show the European Union underperforming economically relative to the United States and China, and Southern European countries have been particularly strongly affected. The accelerated pace of technical change poses a serious threat to the entire European Union, and in particular to its weaker members. To fill the gap with the US and China, the EU must grow, but must grow economically, meaning in size, and technologically. And this would call for massive investments and a new, more cohesive industrial policy, which is necessary to prevent the digital transformation from becoming an additional factor of polarization. And this requires the concerted action of all its members, which will come about only within a different theoretical and political approach. So, welcome the rules, but welcome also a different approach, a theoretical approach. And as Guntram was mentioning, we need to pay more attention to the size of the investment and less on the problem of stability. So what this crisis has shown, and I finished, is the existence of a sort of a fallacy of composition. The sustainability of a common debt is higher than the sum of the member countries' debts, as shown by the EU Recovery and Resilience Fund, which could represent a first step in this direction. How policymakers spend resources and the quality of public finances are, of course, of central importance to close the gap between core and periphery. But they must be placed in a context that pursues solvency through growth rather than through market discipline or fiscal rules. Without growth, a sustainability rule may not solve and even worsen the divergence between creditor and debtor countries. Thank you.
Annamaria, thank you so much. Some great questions there that we'll look forward to hearing Philippe address. But first, Thomas, we'd like to hear your comments, reactions, and questions. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for the presentations and the discussion so far. I think this is a very timely raising of the issue, and therefore I also thank the forum for raising the whole issue today. I very much hope that in the near future we will all meet around one table and look each other physically in the eye. I think that's definitely what we're all missing. Now, let me give some reactions to what we've heard. One point to what Sébastien Doulin has said, and the couple of figures he showed. I mean, only picking up one thing, you showed the development of the debt to GDP ratio over just a couple of countries. One could also speak about some other countries, but be it. The one thing, and this has always loomed, I think also in the other interventions, is, and let's name the one country. I mean, Italy, after the great financial crisis, has had a decade of no growth. The country has entered the pandemic crisis with a GDP, so with a wealth level, which was below what the country had before the financial crisis. So I'm saying this because from my analysis, this points not to a quantitative question of fiscal support. This points to structural issues. And I think this is next to or very close to the fiscal rule discussion, the one discussion we need to have. And Guntram pointed to the relevance of the Next Generation EU and the Resilience and Recovery Facility effort, which has been brought together last year. And this is, of course, not only to give fiscal space. I agree fully with what Guntram said. It is basically there to allow the member states after the pandemic to come out of this crisis with a better growth perspective, with a better growth potential. And if we do not realize this, we will have to discuss fiscal policy in a very different way. If we achieve it, we can also probably discuss fiscal policy in a different way. Now, on these rules, I think there is an agreement. I mean, really, there is an agreement that the rules are too complex, that they are too difficult to enforce. And I think there's also agreement that they've only been partially applied in the past. So something needs to be done about these rules. There's absolute agreement in the ECOFIN, in the academic world, in the Eurogroup, wherever. We had a couple of rounds in the ECOFIN and in the Eurogroup under a couple of presidencies in the last years. And I can tell you there's absolutely no consensus emerging. Now, this shouldn't stop us from discussing this intellectually and even politically, but we need to keep that in mind. So I wanted to make 5 points because I've studied with great interest the proposal, but now having heard the presentation, I'm down to 4 points because 1 point hasn't been mentioned from the paper. So that makes my intervention even shorter. So the first one talks about political economy. I have the question, would we have the same discussion on these rules if we all were at, let's say, more or less a debt to GDP level of 60% today? We could still discuss whether we wanted these very complicated rules, etc. I think the discussion would be different. I think the discussion would even be different if we were all around or very close to today's average of the debt to GDP level, which is 100%. Even in that situation, I think the discussion would be different. Now, we're having the discussion in a political situation where we have an average debt to GDP ratio of 100%, but then we have significant outliers, right? And in both directions, by the way. And this is what makes the discussion extremely difficult because, you hear people proposing alternatives or changes to the rules. If you close your eyes, at least in the ECOFIN, I'm pretty sure you can say from which country this person is coming from. Because every minister is arguing against his own or her own debt to GDP situation. So this is, of course, not really helpful for an open intellectual discussion, but this is the context we're in. So we have to take that into account. Okay, that's my first point. My second point is on credibility. Now, replacing horizontal rules for fiscal policy in a monetary union, and I think I'm pretty close to what Guntram said, even when he said this is maybe a necessary discussion on our way to something deeper, which some people call the fiscal union. But replacing these horizontal rules by nationally defined rules, by nationally defined limits to debt sustainability, and by shifting the burden of measuring whether the policy targets have been achieved or not to basically to national institutions, where I also would share the doubts whether this is possible. I mean, I just read the what the French fiscal board writes on the fiscal policy of the government, but I see no connection or reflection in what the government does. I mean, there's no, they both exist, and well, so I have my doubt here. Then these nationally defined limits to debt sustainability and the nationally set targets for a 5-year deficit and therefore expenditure limit policy with a 5-year account possibility to over or underperform and always be able to say we'll wake up to this next year or in 2 years or in 3 years, I think would make it extremely difficult to measure the success of the policy. So is the policy which will be announced by such a national government, is that one fulfilled or not? I don't think we have sufficient elements to measure this. Then my third point is on the role of the ECB. What I understand, but maybe I'm wrong here, is that you, Philippe, said that you permanently will charge the ECB of taking out the spreads. And this means, in my reading, that the ECB will be there forever, which with a large a portion of buying government bonds just to take out these spreads. And I'm not sure that this is, I mean, once we're at changing the rules, why not changing the mandate of the ECB also? But I'm not sure that all this is feasible for the time being. Then I jump to my fifth point, which is, will this be a simple rule, what you propose? And I have my doubts, because if the moment you look into how to establish a 5-year deficit and expenditure rule path with consequences on the debt sustainability and all of that, you are obviously back to the old ingredients called output gap, estimate for tax receipts in the future under certain conditions, estimates which you would have to put in for changes of tax policies. How much does this cost? How much does this bring in outer years? All these are exactly the ingredients which over the years with this current pact led to the incredible high complexity of the rules, because we tried to adapt the rules every time we came across something which was making it more difficult. So by summing up, I'm sorry, I'm coming from this ministerial point of view. I'm not an academic. I think I would caution to be careful with shifting the rules, because what you propose actually would mean treaty changes. I mean, you know, the 60% and the 3%. If we like it, if we know if we would write them in again today or not. This is quite a hurdle for a change, right? We have the intergovernmental agreement, the fiscal compact, which is can also only be changed by unanimity. So there are a number of very high legal hurdles which might make it difficult to install these changes. And then I only can join Guntram when he says, in the past, these rules have shown flexibility, which you would not find once you just read all these rules and regulations, and it's quite a pile. And I won't claim to be able to cite them all instantaneously. Much flexibility has been found. Much flexibility has been found in 2010. I mean, we just declared that everybody breaks the 3% rule because this was found to be appropriate. And then we tried to define a path out of this high deficit situation, but not for the reason that we wanted to fulfill with the rules. We wanted to comply with the rules. We did this because we wanted to give the markets some credibility. We wanted to be credible. We said, this is a Keynesian situation. I'm not talking about 2010, of course. A complete Keynesian situation, so we will go big into deficits, but then of course we will have to explain to our citizens how we will roll out of this high debt and high deficit situation in the past, to avoid that they would expect from the outset tax rises. So there has been a lot of flexibility in there, and of course we are seeing even more flexibility today. And I think, after all, the issues of debt sustainability to be judged, after all, maybe by the markets at one point in time. Second, the room for maneuver in bad times. So having for fiscal policy a room for maneuver if time gets worse, becomes worse, another crisis appears, etc. And thirdly, something like a good rating also, at least for a couple of, let's say, larger member states, the more the better, of course. All this, I would expect, will also in the future be a condition for forceful acting. And this is something which I would also call resilience of the European Union or the monetary union. Do we have, out of a more or less stable situation for a decade or for a couple of years, do we have the power, do we have the possibility, do we have the credibility to act forceful if just another crisis comes around? And a crisis, by definition, of course, is not something which you can see on the horizon, because that wouldn't be a real crisis. I mean, a real crisis is something which hits you by surprise, right? So I think we have to discuss the rules. I'm absolutely ready and willing to do that. I have a little bit of hesitance to say, look, here is the large sketch, and this will need treaty changes, and it would need a new consensus. And both things will be very difficult to achieve, I'm afraid. And I would also not want to have us leading a discussion which is only on quantitative economics alone. I think we need to talk substance. We need to talk about the quality of public finances. We need to talk what Guntram also alluded to, the investments into climate change policies. And we need, therefore, to talk about the growth potential. And this is a big chance that we have today with the Next Generation EU. So I think these are some elements which I wanted to throw into the debate. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Philippe, the burden of proof is quite rightly on you since it's your proposal. But I think we've had a flavor of why it's so difficult to get to political consensus on this, because there are so many worries out there, some of them having been expressed by the three panelists. But in a sense, they strike me as all being a variant of the theme of your proposal doesn't really change things enough, in the sense that it doesn't seem to secure proper fiscal behavior. It's liable to capture. It doesn't encourage investment enough. There are sort of various things in which it doesn't seem to actually improve enough, and that's what I'm hearing on what we already have. Well, that's my sort of reading of the common theme here. But there were a lot of different challenges put to you. You'll have to pick the ones you think you can answer now. But go ahead. Why don't you give them a stab?
Okay, great. But actually, Xavier and Jean are here, so maybe I should give them a chance to respond. But it's true, just not to make as if I let my co-authors answer the hard questions. Just a point on because debt sustainability and indeed the potential growth has been mentioned by several of you, and I think this is an important point. We do not refrain from saying that indeed debt sustainability is very much based on potential growth, and that this is very important. Indeed, this is the economic discussion, this is the economic analysis, which is completely lacking in the fiscal rules that we have now. So indeed, this is this discussion that we need to have at the national level, and here I think it's super important to have national fiscal institutions which indeed put the difference between this type of spending and this type of spending that will have very different impact on growth and therefore on debt sustainability. This discussion is completely lacking. So I hear a lot of criticism on some of our proposals. I think some are based on, I think, a bit incomplete reading on what we propose, I think we all agree that the present rules do not go into the fundamentals of, for example, investment, green investment, but also in terms of even debt sustainability. So I think that that's part of what we want to do. But anyway, let me, maybe Jean, I think, wanted to say something on green investment in particular to respond to Guntram.
So I'd like both Jean and Xavier to come in, but can I just ask one follow-up question to you, Philippe, on what you just said? Because I was thinking about the same thing. It sounds like you're saying that you want a lot more of the substantive discussion of both quantity and quality to happen in between the national government, the national fiscal board or fiscal control institution, and the EU. I mean, let me just put an example on the table, right? So suppose a government thinks, we're going to do a lot of deficit spending to scale up early childcare provision, because we agree with Philippe from the previous presentation that will increase female labor participation, that increases potential output, and that will keep debt sustainable. How does that sort of argument, an attempt at a widening of the deficit even with debt high because you think that's going to happen, how does that work in your proposal?
Well, the government has to
by Bidenomics in a southern European country, right?
Yeah. So the government has to convince, has to have a convincing point that indeed this type of financing will have an impact on potential growth. We'll have to try to quantify it, because obviously, and this will be super difficult, and we fully agree on that. We'll have to have a discussion, so there will have to be a national discussion also, but also at the European level. And here I would part with Guntram. I think you were going too far in saying we completely nationalize this debate. We don't do that. We partly give more weight to the national discussion, but we really, in the institutional framework, we need to have these types of discussion exactly on this, but also on expenditure, on taxes, etc. We still have a lot of discussion between the governments at the ECOFIN, at the Commission level, at for the European Fiscal Board. So please don't caricature our proposals. We are not saying that the whole discussion is at the national level. The externality is clearly European, and therefore we have to have this discussion also at the European level. We have to have surveillance at the European level.
Can I ask Jean and then Xavier if he wants to come in and address, well, whichever of the panoply of challenges they want to pick up.
Thank you.
Jean, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear and see you.
Okay, good. No, there are many challenges, that's good. Thank you for that. Let me first address some political economy point, then some technical point, and then I want to focus on the green dimension. On the political economy, I mean, we're sort of having a Lampedusa type discussion, right? I mean, there are one camp that says everything must change for nothing to change. So that's basically our position. We focus, as Philippe just said, on the externality. We say the externality is the core of the issue that's being addressed by the fiscal rules. We want to focus on that, but for that we need to change the rules. And basically what Thomas is telling us is that we can be extremely flexible without changing anything. So everything can change in practice without changing the rules. This is a discussion about, this is a political economy discussion. And frankly, I'm doubtful that the system of rules as it is, without some fundamental reform, will have much legitimacy in imposing some adjustments or some discipline to the member states in a situation in which public opinion has been told during 2 years, we spend whatever we have to spend. And, quoi qu'il en coûte, as we said in France, as the president said. And that means, having the rules coming back without knowing, without public opinion, without members of parliament, without political forces knowing why these rules are put in place and what exactly is the externality, what the problems these rules are supposed to solve, is in my view dangerous. Second, on decentralization, as Philippe said, it's very controlled decentralization. So it's within a certain framework, and it's with in the end a decision by the council on the basis of a commission recommendation. But we want sort of to base it on a much more granular assessment done at national level. It's an issue of ownership, if you wish. We think that there would be more ownership if the government starts by saying, this is my target, and this target is first assessed by a national fiscal institution that gives a view on the validity of this target, and the appropriateness of this target, and then it goes through the machinery of approval as it is in the treaty, because we're not saying we should change the treaty. Third point is on the veil of ignorance. Obviously, the veil of ignorance, it's always easier when there is a veil of ignorance. As regards the debt, there is no veil of ignorance. So countries, perfectly right, Thomas, each member state has a view on what the change in the rule may imply, knowing that what the initial situation. Yes, but that's part of the game, and I don't think we can ignore the fact that this dispersion of situation is enormous. So uniform rules precisely in a situation where you have this huge dispersion of debt situations means you have to finesse the way you're implementing the rules. So you're creating a lot of ad hoc treatment in the implementation of the rules, which adds to the opacity of the whole system and the politicization of the whole system. Quick points on some technicalities. You said this needs a treaty change. It does not require technically a treaty change with ratification by national parliaments or referenda, because there is a clause in Article 126 that says that the reference values can be changed by unanimity. So without a treaty amendment procedure. And I think that's quite important in view of the hurdle it may represent. Secondly, your point, Thomas, on the ECB. We're not saying the ECB should sort of continue to limit the spreads. We're saying the ECB should not be in the business of limiting the spread if a country is in a situation that objectively raises concern about its sustainability. We're saying the job of the ECB is to avoid multiple equilibria, so to avoid self-fulfilling crisis. And that's what the ECB basically has been doing. It has gone further in recent times. We don't think that should be permanently done. I mean, this is an exceptional situation. In normal times, the ECB should not try to control the spreads sort of across the board, but it should sort out what are the fundamental crises and what are the crises that are triggered by self-fulfilling expectations. Finally, on the climate issue, Guntram is right. I mean, this is a very difficult issue, and I don't think we have the right way of thinking about it. Let me say personally how I would sort of see it. Assume we would know how much investment needs to be done to achieve net zero. Okay, and assume that this investment would sort of leave potential output constant, but change the composition of the capital stock. So substitute brown investment with brown capital with green capital. So basically, this would be an equivalent to an international transfer, because it means there would be no domestic cost, no domestic benefit, but it would sort of be the contribution of the country to the overall goal of reducing emission. So it's an international transfer, right? So it has the character of a debt. You have to pay this debt as part of your climate duty, right? So you have two debts to start with. You have, and also the climate debt, there's a finite horizon, because we want to achieve that by 2030 or 2050, whatever date you want to take, okay? So basically you have two debts. You have a debt that you have to pay by a certain date, that's the climate debt, and that there's debt that you can roll over because it's financial debt is if your solvency is not a concern. And the question is how you manage the two. So it's fairly simple in the case of a financially solvent country, and that's what we're saying. You don't gain anything in terms of financial sustainability by postponing your climate investment, because you have to do the climate investment by the certain date. So the fact that you're not doing it now is just an illusion. And so this should be factored in. And that's what we're saying. The difficult question to which we're not providing an answer is sort of what happens for a sort of borderline insolvent country. And here the question is, on which debt will you be taking the risk of default? And how you manage the two risks of default. And that's the question we're not solving in our proposal. But that's a hard question to solve.
Thank you. Jean, on the last point, can you just explain how this works operationally? So the domestic financial, the fiscal board, sorry, it will say, look, you can't cut this investment spending, this green investment spending, and think that that improves your numbers, because we'll adjust for it, because we know then you just have to do it 10 years down the line anyway. It's just a bit like the recent German Supreme Court ruling.
No, yeah, I mean, it's in the spirit of the German Constitutional Court ruling. So if a country comes and say, okay, I'm perfectly, I'm doing my homework as regards the fiscal adjustment, but doesn't do its homework as regards the climate investment, basically you were telling this country this is a fake. I mean, this is not in compliant with the climate adjustment, climate commitment, and therefore it's not sustainable, because that means you will have to do the investment later on or default on your commitment.
Yeah, that really helps understand it.
5 years, okay? If you don't do anything in the next 5 years, this means you will have to do a lot later. And therefore, you're not improving your sustainability.
So then, of course, in assessing your proposal, we come back to this question of how independent we believe that these institutions will be. Xavier, do you want to add anything, address some of the challenges? Yes. I can't see you, but I think you're here. Oh, there you are. Yes, we can see you.
Very quickly, one remark. I think there's many interesting remarks and criticism. There's always one danger when we discuss fiscal rules, is to think that we can design fiscal rules to implement the good economic policy. And I think it's not a good idea. Fiscal rules are not done for that. They should not, promote bad policies, and they should be consistent with good policies. But there are some issues, practical issues we are speaking about, such as green investment, education for childcare, education for, social mobility, geographical mobility, and so on and so on, industrial policy, management of Italian debt, partly some socialization and things like that. All of that will need political debate at a European level. It's a little bit dangerous to load fiscal rules with all these issues. Fiscal rules should care about fiscal budget, so fiscal sustainability, and the main externality we should focus on. And I think we have other European instruments for good policies. It can be country-specific recommendation, it can be a discussion at the ECOFIN, at the Council, and there's a danger, to want to impose with fiscal rule with the center some policies to nations, to member states, that may not agree on their own national political debate. And this is very dangerous from my side. So from Guntram, I have the feeling that you do not trust member states into their ability to assess their national fiscal trajectory. I do not buy that. What we discuss in the paper is, as Philippe said, is not that full decentralization. It's a hierarchy of institutions to allow the concrete analysis of spending, education, of tax revenue by national financial institution, with a methodology defined by the EFB, with the Commission validating this analysis. So we are very careful in the circulation of information to let the final work to the Commission. But with some decentralization of the analysis at the level of member states, where they add the information about, maybe some kind of hidden fiscal tricks that government can use. So the way I see our decentralization procedure is a procedure to be much more efficient in an fiscal analysis of the government, not only 1 year ahead, but 5 years ahead. So it's a way I think you should read our decentralization procedure. It's not that we give full power to a national financial institution. It's that we use local information in assessment of the credibility of the trajectory of public debt. Second, we have fiscal rules. So two ways. Either we follow Thomas, we say, don't waste our political time discussing that and use the discretion in the current framework. And there's some flexibility, and you are totally right. Since Juncker Commission, there are lots of flexibility, and there's a document about the flexibility of the pact. So we have ideas about that. Do you think it will survive the debate, as Jean has said? Do you think it will survive the citizen that you will explain that 60% public debt over GDP, it's okay? And we, as Europeans, we will leave this framework. We do not believe in, but it's not important. We use discretion. I think it will not survive politically. The second way you can read our paper is some institutional design to allow for a form of discretion which is based on sound economic analysis of key issue, which is the trajectory of public debt, with internalization of the cost of short-run adjustment, which is demand-side policies to avoid austerity debate. So the second way you can read our proposal is to have a concrete institutional design to take seriously the possibility of discretion by member states, validated by the Commission, to allow for discretion to be accepted politically by US citizens. Otherwise, we as Europeans take a big risk of saying, okay, let's live with this thing, the 60% rule that will apply for some case, Italy from some quarters, others not, and people will understand what we are doing. I think it's a political bet, and I will not fully follow this path with 100% confidence. So I think it's worth using this crisis to go in the good direction, as Annamaria said. And you are right, Annamaria, we could go one step further, introducing to the debate some debt relief to start on the good path of debt before we apply the rule. And indeed, this is a fair debate. We are not putting there in the debate. We are more modest in our strategy of using this crisis to go in the good direction. If we agree that it's a good direction, let's go in this direction. If you think that we go even further, but introducing fiscal tools at European level, debt relief at the same time, funds for green investment, let's do that. But at least we have something which is a good direction for fiscal coordination at the European level with this main issue, which is debt sustainability. So if we have something better, we'd be very happy to support it.
Thanks very much. Sebastian Dullien would like to come back in. He's been listening, and some of you have reacted to his presentation. So I'm going to invite him to talk before he takes the floor. Since we are approaching the end of this session, I'll just encourage anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question or send a comment to let me know in the chat. If they do, they should do that now so that we get time for it. They can either say they want to ask a question or just send the question to me and I can read it out. Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to add an observation on the debate. I'm sometimes baffled because when we talk about reforms, it seems that even if we have a clearly deficient framework or set of rules, the bar for reforms is perfection. Yeah, so, and I mean, this is not what we usually do in economics. Of course, we do optimize, but then if we cannot reach first best solution, we try to get a second best solution and not a worst or second worst solution. Yeah, and if we know that we are in a second worst world, and we know we cannot get to the first best solution, we try to at least to improve. And in a way, the burden of proof here seems incredibly high for reform proposals, not just the one we have heard here, but to others. I mean, to be blunt, if we define the current set of rules, we would, well, I would say we have a rather dysfunctional set of rules without coherent intellectual or academic foundation, which work because in times of need, they have the flexibility to be suspended. Yeah, and now if we look, if that is the status quo, improvement isn't that difficult. And one proposal for improvement we have seen today, and if you go through different dimensions, you can immediately see that what the colleagues have presented here today is, or at least I don't see any dimension where it's worse than the status quo, and I can see a lot of dimension where it's better. Let's see, what is the goal of our fiscal rules? We want to guarantee fiscal sustainability, and at the same time, we want to prevent procyclicality. We want to prevent the threat of excessive austerity. And well, maybe also we don't want to have underinvestment. And I see, if I look at that, I don't see why it's worse in preventing or in keeping government finances on a sustainable path than the status quo. Even if there are some technical issues, whether there might be a capture of some institutions or not, I'm a bit more optimistic here. It's clearly better in preventing excessive austerity. It's better in preventing pro-cyclical cuts because of problems with measuring the output gap. So it really would be an improvement on all these issues. I'm not sure this is the best reform proposal we can have. My institute has put another one forward, which is similar in some parts, is different in other parts. I still see the problem of potential underinvestment here, and I agree with Guntram here that there is an incentive in the current rules, which might also be in the new rules, that there is an underinvestment of public finances. But I think that the goalpost to say, well, from where we are, we need to go to perfection or we don't change anything, this is a bit odd.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. You know, that's a challenge to everyone. So we'll see if we have time to do a very quick round at the end. I want to bring it back to Philippe, unless he wants to pass it to one of the other authors, with just one question, and it kind of follows up on what some of what Sebastian said, and also something Annamaria said. I mean, one goal here clearly has to be to avoid pro-cyclical consolidation, the way we saw that was counterproductive even in terms of debt sustainability in the Eurozone crisis. And you left to one side your demand externality issue. So, I mean, could you just say a little bit about how you deal with actually sustaining demand when it's most needed in your framework, both in terms of the cross-border externality and just in terms of its role in sustainability domestically? I mean, we don't have much time, but if you can at least very quickly sketch that other part of your proposal, because we haven't been able to talk about it.
So at the national level, what we recommend is through the spending rule. Basically, the spending rule is what takes care of pro-cyclical fiscal policy. Because basically, if you have a spending which is set, that means that basically spending is not going to go down into a recession, and you'll have a budget deficit during a recession and a budget surplus during a boom. So that's what makes it a fiscal a spending rule. Basically, is basically very counter-cyclical, more than what we have right now. And there's been quite a lot of work on this by the IMF. We had a previous note with Zvolt Darvas has done some work on that too, showing that indeed at the national level the fiscal rule is less pro-cyclical than what we have now. Now, the second thing is at the Eurozone level, indeed, what we say is that if you have a situation where the ECB cannot have lower interest rates because we're at the zero lower bond and there's a recession, then indeed we need to have the possibility to have a fiscal stimulus like the one we had during COVID, an exceptional Eurozone-wide fiscal stimulus that takes care of the demand deficit at the Eurozone level. Now, at the national level, there's also the issue of what happens if one country has a fiscal policy that is too strict and generates negative demand spillovers on the others. That's where, to be frank, I think this has always been an issue and not an easy one to deal with. Again, we give here to the Commission and the Council the role of providing guidance on the fact that this country should have a more a pro-growth type of fiscal policy.
Thanks very much. Yeah, Xavier, go ahead quickly, please.
A small detail that's in the proposition. For this aggregate demand management, we propose to let the aggregate fiscal stance be proposed not by the European Fiscal Board, but to give it to the Commission. It's not a small detail. The Commission will be in charge of assessing the lack of demand at the euro area level, and will think as well at the national budget in their assessment of the national budget, with the same tools that the Commission will use to assess the aggregate fiscal stance at the European level. So this idea to give this mandate from the ECB to the Commission is a small step for the internalization of the aggregate fiscal stance in the policy coordination of national budgets.
And just a technical question, is there no risk of a conflict between the aggregate of the national outcomes with your rules and the Commission judgment of the aggregate fiscal stance?
That's the interesting part. Is there the difference? There must be a second round of coordination for the two numbers, the sum of national proposal and the assessment at the European level to converge. So here the room for coordination will be in the same interaction between the Commission and national states. That's a part of the idea, to create some friction in this sum of the two numbers.
So in a sense, this is again getting back to what I asked Philippe about, to get some of the substantive discussion back into play, it sounds like. Annamaria, I'd like to get back to you. I can't see you, but I hope you're still with us, because that last discussion was very much about some of the issues you raised. So I thought maybe you want to come back and respond and see if you have been reassured. But let's see if you are there. Yes, you are there. Wonderful.
Yeah. No, I think that the experience has shown that you have a very asymmetric working of the rules. It is very much stronger if you are in a deficit of the budget, or if you are in a surplus. So I don't think that the recommendation for reflation in Germany have been very, very efficient. So I think that this problem can be a very serious one. And I stress the fact that if you rely on this debt sustainability of a single country without taking into account the fact that there are these spillover effects, then you are simply judging a condition of the country on variables that it cannot control. And this can be a serious problem, because, I mean, in a economic union or a monetary union, these spillover effects are very, very strong. I mean, it's, let's say, if inflation now takes a hit, because in some countries the economy is going faster than in others, then you might have a restriction of the interest rates, which is, we know that, very dangerous. But also, if the German economy, which is stronger than the Italian, the French, and the Southern economist, takes starts again, and it is driven by exports. So, I mean, there is this idea of the countries with a fiscal space that should reflate, but they reflate on different components of demand, and the spillover effects are different. For instance, now the German economy is much more integrated with the Eastern Europe than with the Southern Europe. So once again, relying on expansion of the those countries with the fiscal space can be very dangerous. I mean, I think we need a more coordinated policy of reflation, and this can be green economy or can be investment in technology, in digitalization. I think also, at last point, that there has been quite a sort of self accommodation or how do you say in English? I mean, the German economy has fallen behind the new technologies, and the lack of investment in all these years has weighed very heavily on the competitiveness of Germany and all the European area. So I wouldn't underestimate the importance of a reflation on the European Union level. And I think that the German economy, the German economists or industrialists are actually much more aware of this danger than perhaps the economists and the politicians. But I mean,
Annamaria, thank you very much. And I realize we should have this discussion again after the next German elections, after which things may change. We are out of time, but Thomas and Guntram, I do want to give you a chance to kind of, if you want to share one final thought, but very, very short, please, because we're already keeping Harold James waiting.
I can be very short if you want, Martin, and thanks again for organizing this and managing this discussion. I've heard a lot of very interesting things, which would in a normal world would make me jump on a plane, fly to Paris to discuss this more in depth with the three colleagues, and I promise to do that later. Just one element: I haven't said that I don't want to change the rules. I have said that everybody agrees that these rules are not really good, not to say more. I'm just a little bit politically not sure where it leads us to quite radically launch a discussion to do it this way or that way, because I just see from what I've heard in the ECOFIN and in the Eurogroup that people are very, very, very much apart. And there might be a southern possibility to agree on something. There might also be a northern and an eastern possibility to agree on something. But to bring all this together, I'm not sure we will reach a consensus anytime soon. I don't say we shouldn't try, and I don't say this is not worth the issue, and I don't say that it's easy to go back to applying the rules.
Well, and just to add, Martin, I mean, and to pick up on the point that Annamaria made. Point on the greening of the economy. I mean, the point, why did I emphasize also so much the importance of green investment and the fact that this needs to be addressed in the reform of the rules? Well, it has to do also with the reflation argument. It will help reflate the German economy and the Eurozone economy, because it will entail massive investments. And guess what? The countries that need to do a lot of these investments, some of those countries really have the fiscal space to do so. So the concern of Jean that this would create sustainability risks wouldn't apply in the case of Germany. And if you think of this from a political point of view, and sort of let me just make the political point, it looks as if the Green Party will play some role in the next German government. And, I think that will be the moment where, if we think about what can be done realistically, it seems to me that the greening will be a big agenda, and it will be a big agenda that will help also from a Eurozone point of view. And so I think if we get bogged down in the debate on specific technical aspects of the fiscal rules, we might miss the political momentum behind sort of the reform, which in the end, I think will drive the investment and the reflation, and by the way, also achieve our generational problem, namely decarbonization of our economy. Thanks.
Guntram, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone, the authors, the commenters, and the audience. I think political momentum is the key thing to end on that Guntram mentioned, because clearly there's change in the air, and despite what Thomas said about the seeming impossibility of finding consensus on new fiscal rules, so much else seems to be changing that, you know, let's watch this space. I think there's language in the treaty saying that national domestic economic policies have to be treated as a matter of common interest. I think we at least have done that today. But anyway, this conversation keeps going, but not now,